You, yeah, you listening right now, have you ever just stared at your smartphone, maybe while it's installing like yet another seemingly pointless minor software update, and thought to yourself, is this it?
Right, like, have we basically reached the peak of human invention?
Exactly. Because it is so easy to tap into this uh, almost suffocating anxiety today that we are just running out of world-changing ideas, that we're staring down the barrel of an era of permanent technological stagnation.
Where, all we get are slightly better cameras and more intrusive, targeted ads.
Yeah, well, the big civilization-altering leaps are permanently in the rearview mirror.
It's an incredibly prevalent modern fear. I mean, you hear it all the time. The underlying assumption is that the golden age of discovery has just come and gone.
Right.
And right now, humanity is basically just coasting on the exhaust fumes of the Industrial Revolution, just kind of waiting for the engine to finally sputter out.
And that is exactly why today's deep dive is going to be so crucial. We are pulling apart a really brilliant piece of source material today. It's a revised 2025 Nobel lecture titled Can Progress Be Sustained? By the economic historian Joel Mokyr.
Published in the American Economic Review, yeah.
Right. And our mission today is to dive into the actual historical mechanics of human progress. We want to definitively answer whether economic and technological growth is hitting a permanent brick wall or if it's, just catching its collective breath before the next massive leap forward.
And to answer that, we really have to start by taking the pessimistic argument seriously. We have to understand why so many highly educated people genuinely believe that progress is stalling out.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, and the foundation of that pessimism is rooted in what economists refer to as the curse of concavity.
The curse of concavity, which is a very poetic way of describing the law of diminishing returns, right?
Yeah. Precisely. If you look at the traditional historical drivers of economic growth, they all eventually exhaust themselves. I mean, you can stack up more capital and build more factories, but the 10th factory doesn't yield the same economic boost as the first one did.
Sure, the impact waters down.
Exactly. You can expand trade by lowering tariffs or building massive cargo ships, but once the world is globally connected, that specific growth engine slows down.
Because there's no one left to connect to.
Right. Even tweaking your institutions to make markets more efficient eventually hits a ceiling. If a nation relies solely on those forces, the mathematics basically dictate that its growth will relentlessly, inevitably slow down to a crawl.
And the fear is that this exact same mathematical rule of diminishing returns applies directly to science and technology.
Yes.
That's the low-hanging fruit theory, isn't it? Like, economists like Robert Gordon and Tyler Cowen argue that humanity has essentially wandered through the great orchard of science and already picked all the obvious, easy-to-reach, world-altering inventions.
The big stuff. Electricity, internal combustion, the airplane, antibiotics.
Yeah, those were the low-hanging fruit. Now, finding truly new ideas is becoming exponentially more difficult and, frankly, more expensive.
And they have compelling data to back this up, which Mokyr actually acknowledges in the text.
Right, like Eroom's law,
Mm,
which is just Moore's law spelled backward.
a great name.
It really is. The paper points out that since the mid-1950s, the number of actual pharmaceutical breakthroughs we get per dollar spent on research has been steadily collapsing.
Because the underlying biology we're trying to manipulate is just too complex now.
Exactly. It takes massively more money, entire armies of researchers, and decades of time just to get a slightly better, marginally effective drug.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you look at the actual macro data Mokyr provides later in the paper, that pessimistic narrative starts to show some serious cracks.
It really does.
Yeah, figures 1 and 2 in the source show that global patent applications are absolutely skyrocketing. They aren't flatlining in the slightest.
No, they're going straight up.
Now, obviously, a massive chunk of that volume over the last 2 decades is being driven by a meteoric rise in filings out of China. But still, the sheer global volume of new innovation is moving sharply up and to the right. So if I could throw an analogy out there,
Go for it.
if we really have picked all the low-hanging fruit, maybe the actual point of science isn't about wandering around the orchard hoping to stumble across a magical unpicked tree. Maybe science is simply the process of building taller ladders to reach the high-hanging fruit.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize how the source refutes the stagnation argument. The researchers who are panicking about diminishing returns are almost entirely looking at existing firms utilizing existing techniques.
Right.
And yes, if a legacy pharmaceutical giant is spending billions trying to endlessly tweak a 30-year-old molecule, they are absolutely going to face brutal diminishing returns. But the economist Philippe Aghion points out that this pessimistic view completely ignores the constant disruptive entry of entirely new firms armed with completely fresh ideas.
Because they aren't trying to climb the old ladder at all?
Yeah.
Exactly. These new entrants essentially reset the innovation clock. They introduce a completely different paradigm. They build an elevator instead of a ladder.
Oh, I like that.
And to understand how humanity continuously manages to build those new mechanisms, Mokyr introduces a brilliant framework that divides all useful human knowledge into two distinct interacting categories.
Propositional knowledge and prescriptive knowledge.
Yes. Propositional knowledge is the what. It is pure science. It's the fundamental understanding of natural laws, physics, biology, chemistry.
Okay.
Prescriptive knowledge is the how. That is technology, engineering, the actual physical instructions for making a tool or a machine function in the real world.
And what's wild is that for the vast majority of human history, we were incredibly skilled at the how without having the slightest clue about the what.
Oh, entirely.
Like medieval artisans built incredibly complex windmills, and early metallurgists learned to cast iron without knowing a single thing about the underlying laws of fluid dynamics or thermodynamics or metallurgy.
Didn't know why it worked.
Exactly. They just knew that if you shaped the sail this way, or heated the forge to this exact color, you got a result.
It was pure, unadulterated trial and error. But trial and error has a hard ceiling. You eventually just run out of lucky guesses.
Right.
What made the Industrial Revolution uniquely powerful, and what makes modern economic growth potentially infinite, is that the how and the what finally started communicating with each other. Technology and science began to co-evolve in a really tight feedback loop.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the standard textbook assumption we all have is that some brilliant, isolated scientist in the lab discovers a fundamental law of physics, and then decades later, an engineer uses that pure science to build a machine.
The linear model, yeah.
Right. But the source material points out that historically, the arrow of progress points in the exact opposite direction. Science actually owes vastly more to the steam engine than the steam engine owes to science.
It's so true. The historian Derek Price coined a perfect term for this artificial revelation.
Artificial revelation.
Yeah. Because human biology is severely limited. Our eyes and ears can only perceive a tiny fractional sliver of reality. We cannot see microorganisms. We cannot see the moons of Jupiter. We cannot see the ultraviolet spectrum or the structure of a protein.
We're basically blind to most of the universe.
Exactly. So science fundamentally stalls out when it can no longer observe anything new. It is technology, the prescriptive how, that builds the physical tools allowing scientists to transcend human biological limits.
I was looking at the historical examples in the source, and the one that stopped me in my tracks was Joseph Jackson Lister in the 19th century.
Oh, that's a great one.
Right. He didn't invent germ theory. He was basically just tinkering with the how. He invented the achromatic microscope, which just mathematically eliminated the blurry color distortions in older lenses.
Just a mechanical improvement.
Exactly. But that one piece of pure technology is what actually allowed biologists to finally clearly see microorganisms, which literally birthed the germ theory of disease. The technology unlocked the science.
And if you fast forward to the 20th century, you see the exact same dynamic with the laser. The laser started as a technological tool, basically a solution looking for a problem.
Right.
But it quickly became a master key for artificial revelation across completely unrelated scientific fields.
Well, yeah.
We used laser interferometers in LIGO to detect gravitational waves from colliding black holes a billion light years away. We use LIDAR, which is lasers bouncing off the Earth from the sky to map hidden, overgrown Mayan cities buried beneath the dense jungles of Guatemala. The technology reveals the unseen universe, and that resulting new science allows engineers to build even better technology.
Which brings us right to the bleeding edge with the AI revolution. Because AI isn't just a fancy text generator or a calculator. The source argues it has become a literal mechanism for discovery in its own right.
It is the ultimate artificial revelation.
Yeah. Take the example in the text of Google DeepMind's AI, GenoME. It didn't just organize existing data, it learned the underlying physics of material stability to autonomously identify 2.2 million entirely new crystal structures.
It's mind-boggling.
We are talking about predicting new materials for solid-state batteries or high-temperature superconductors without a human ever mixing chemicals in a lab. It creates a massive, global, positive feedback loop.
And that global nature of the feedback loop is the exact reason why the engine of progress isn't stalling out. When the feedback between science and technology is highly localized, say, fluid dynamics improving the aerodynamics of airplane wings, it eventually hits those diminishing returns we talked about earlier.
Because it's just one narrow field.
Exactly. But when the feedback is global, when a foundational tool like AI or the digital computer or the laser impacts every single scientific discipline simultaneously, the system never converges. The horizon of discovery just keeps expanding outward.
But building these tools, like spending
Yeah.
a decade refining a laser or mapping a genome, is incredibly grueling work. And the math of a single human life doesn't actually align with spending 40 years toiling in a lab. What actually motivates the human beings who are doing the heavy lifting here?
Well, it comes down to a very clever, deeply entrenched, dual incentive system that society evolved over centuries. We essentially formulated two completely different ways to compensate genius, depending on which bucket of knowledge you're contributing to.
Mm-hmm.
If you are an inventor, an engineer adding to the how, the prescriptive knowledge, we utilize the patent system. You publicly disclose the exact mechanics of your invention, and in return, society grants you a temporary, legally enforced monopoly to sell it and reap the financial rewards.
But you can't patent a fundamental law of physics. You can't patent a new mathematical theorem. So how do we incentivize the theoretical scientists adding to the what?
For the scientists, society invented the currency of prestige, peer recognition. We created highly exclusive memberships in the Royal Society, prestigious chaired professorships, knighthoods, and eventually things like the Nobel Prize and the Fields Medal. We effectively tapped into fundamental human vanity and the deep psychological desire for respect among one's intellectual peers.
And what blew my mind in the paper is what an unbelievably asymmetric deal society gets out of this arrangement.
Oh, it's incredible.
The paper cites a massive statistic from the economist William Nordhaus. He calculated that innovators, the brilliant minds actually inventing the future, only end up capturing about 2.2% of the total social surplus of their inventions.
Just 2.2%.
Just 2.2%. The remaining 97.8% of the value diffuses outward. Because once the patent expires or once the idea is out there and gets reverse engineered, the surplus floods to the consumer.
It manifests as cheaper goods, radically longer lifespans, faster communication, and a standard of living that would be basically unimaginable to a king 3 centuries ago.
Think about that.
Yeah.
You are getting 97.8% of the value of the modern world essentially for free. It is literally like walking into a Michelin star restaurant, ordering a $100 steak, leaving a 2-cent tip, and the chef aggressively thanking you for it because they got a shiny piece of metal to pin on their apron.
That's exactly what it is.
It is arguably the greatest bargain in the history of human civilization. We are actively fueling the future using human vanity and temporary monopolies.
What's fascinating here is how delicate that ecosystem actually is. Because you can have the tools of artificial revelation, and you can have highly motivated geniuses, but a seed only grows if the soil is fertile.
The environment matters.
Yes, the broader institutional environment completely dictates whether a radical idea flourishes or gets crushed. History is littered with examples of societies that possessed the knowledge but got the institutions disastrously wrong.
Right. The paper specifically zeroes in on what happens when the state attempts to monopolize the innovation engine.
Look at the trajectory of imperial China. Historically, China's early technological and scientific achievements were entirely unrivaled globally. But structurally, somewhere between 60 and 66% of their prominent technological innovators were directly employed by the state.
Wow, that's a huge majority.
They were incentivized by promotions within a rigid imperial bureaucracy. And that top-down system worked brilliantly under progressive, open-minded emperors. But the very moment the central leadership became insular or conservative, all progress halted immediately.
Because there's nowhere else to go.
Right. There was simply no alternative market for radical, nonconformist ideas. A strikingly similar dynamic played out in the Soviet Union.
Because the state was entirely responsible for deciding what counted as valid research.
Exactly. The Soviet system completely ignored consumer sovereignty to focus overwhelmingly on heavy industry and the military. Worse, autocratic leaders began dictating fundamental science based on political ideology rather than empirical reality.
Which is terrifying.
They literally elevated a charlatan named Trofim Lysenko to the head of Soviet agriculture because his entirely fabricated genetic theories supposedly aligned with Marxist doctrine.
Unbelievable.
And the result was catastrophic crop failures and stagnation. Corner solutions, where only the state exerts total control over research and development, inevitably fail.
But if we flip the map, We see why early modern Europe succeeded where others stalled. The text specifically highlights the fact that Europe wasn't a monolith. It was highly fragmented, a chaotic mess of competing states, principalities, and city-states.
And that geopolitical fragmentation was their greatest structural asset. The philosopher David Hume referred to it as emulation.
Emulation.
Yeah. If you were a brilliant, paradigm-shifting intellectual like Galileo or Descartes, and a reactionary local ruler or religious authority trying to suppress your work, you weren't trapped.
You could just leave.
You could simply pack up your notes and cross the border to a competing state that eagerly wanted the prestige and economic benefit of hosting you. The high mobility of the creative minority imposed a binding physical constraint on oppressive rulers. You couldn't stop the spread of new knowledge. You could only guarantee that the economic benefits of that knowledge enriched your political rivals.
But wait, let me push back on this a little.
Yeah.
Because we just heavily praise the private market and the benefits of fragmentation, but looking at recent history, doesn't the government absolutely need to step in with massive force sometimes?
Absolutely.
I mean, the fragmented private market didn't put a human on the moon. The state did. And what about Operation Warp Speed during the COVID pandemic? That wasn't just decentralized tinkering.
You are absolutely right, and Moker makes that exact crucial distinction. The relationship is an uneasy alliance.
Not an easy alliance, okay.
The government must be intimately involved for two very specific reasons. First, because of that 2.2% rule we discussed earlier. Because the private market only captures a microscopic fraction of the total value of foundational ideas, corporations will always mathematically underinvest in pure, basic science.
They won't spend money if they can't make it back.
Right. So the state has to fund the bedrock layers of propositional knowledge. Second, during massive existential national emergencies, like the Manhattan Project or the race for a vaccine state direction, is critical. The government provides the bottomless funding, the guaranteed purchase orders, and the massive logistical coordination.
But they aren't the ones mixing the chemicals.
Precisely. Notice that even in those extreme cases, the actual execution, the granular lab work and engineering, is almost entirely outsourced to private minds, research universities, and corporations. The state steers the ship, but the private sector rows.
Okay, so the underlying engine of progress is fundamentally robust. The incentives are mathematically effective, and we know exactly what kind of institutional balance allows it to thrive.
Yes.
So if we aren't going to just naturally run out of ideas, what could actually derail human progress today? What are the immediate threats?
Well, Mookie's paper identifies two distinct political pressures squeezing the innovation engine from opposite sides. And presenting this impartially from the source material, on one side there is a rising threat from populist and nationalist movements.
Right.
The paper details a growing wave of anti-intellectualism, a deep cultural hostility toward the creative minority and the ingenious mechanics who actually drive the frontier of knowledge. When a society begins to reflexively view scientific experts with inherent suspicion or frames them merely as corrupt elites trying to dictate the lives of ordinary people, the cultural soil required for innovation turns highly toxic.
And the source points out a second, equally potent threat coming from the other end of the political spectrum, from the left and from technophobes. This is the degrowth movement, and is driven by a very real fear of what the author calls the bite-back effect.
The bite-back effect acknowledges the historical reality that deploying massive new technologies almost always triggers unanticipated, incredibly destructive negative consequences.
Like a boomerang.
Exactly. A classic example cited in the text is tetraethyl lead. In the early 20th century, automotive engineers discovered that adding lead to gasoline miraculously fixed engine knocking and vastly improved mechanical performance.
That was a magic fix.
It was a brilliant, highly effective, prescriptive technological fix for the internal combustion engine. But the bite back was catastrophic widespread, airborne lead poisoning causing severe neurological damage for millions of people living near major highways.
And that directly leads us to the mother of all bite-backs, right? Climate change. The Industrial Revolution gave humanity unprecedented prosperity and lengthened our lifespans, but the how was entirely powered by burning fossil fuels.
And the deferred cost of that progress is terrifyingly high. The paper cites recent economic estimates putting the true social cost of carbon at over $1,200 per ton.
Wow.
To put the sheer scale of that number into perspective, the paper notes that if we fail to adapt, humanity risks a permanent global economic welfare loss of 30% by the year 2100.
30%.
Yes. A 30% loss isn't just a severe recession. It represents a fundamental rewiring of human prosperity. It means entire coastal economies vanishing, global agricultural zones collapsing, and decades of wealth eradication.
That is just a cataclysmic cost.
It is, which is precisely why the degrowth movement passionately argues that we must drastically scale back global consumption and deliberately halt economic expansion to save the habitability of the planet.
But Moncure pushes back hard on that, doesn't he? Because if we look at the historical record, can technology actually solve a civilization-scale problem that technology itself created? Or do the degrowth advocates have the right math?
The source argues vehemently against degrowth as a viable strategy. Instead, it introduces the concept of the focusing device.
Focusing device.
Yes. Throughout history, massive looming crises haven't just caused collapse. They have acted as powerful focusing devices that force rapid, highly targeted technological breakthroughs.
Like a deadline.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, look at the disaster in 1707 when a British naval fleet crashed near the Scilly Islands, killing 1,400 sailors simply because they couldn't accurately calculate longitude at sea.
Right.
That tragedy focused the entire nation, leading directly to the 1714 Longitude Prize, which successfully incentivized the invention of the marine chronometer.
Oh, interesting.
Or look at the early 20th century when the world faced a massive shortage of natural nitrates. Agricultural collapse was imminent. Millions were literally going to starve. That existential crisis acted as the focusing device for the invention of the Haber-Bosch process, which pulls nitrogen directly out of the air to create synthetic fertilizer, literally feeding billions of people today.
So what does this all mean? When we ask the core question of the paper, can progress be sustained? Montiere's ultimate conclusion is that economic and technological growth is not just highly sustainable, it is absolutely inevitable if humankind is going to survive.
It has to be.
We are currently facing the dual existential threats of catastrophic climate change and severe global demographic aging, a future where we simply won't have enough young people to physically care for the elderly, making massive leaps in AI and robotic caregivers an absolute necessity, not just a luxury.
We can't shrink our way out of that.
Right. We cannot degrow our way out of these compounding problems. The math simply doesn't work. We have to invent our way out.
And we undeniably have the tools to do it. The global feedback loops of artificial revelation are spinning faster today than at any point in human history. But success isn't guaranteed. It requires our institutions to boldly recognize these overlapping crises as focusing devices, and crucially, it requires the broader public to maintain deep trust in the scientific process itself.
So the next time you look at your smartphone, or an electric vehicle, or even just a single pair of glasses sitting on your desk, don't look at them as finished, static products. They aren't the peak of the mountain. Look at them as temporary stepping stones in a continuous, centuries-long cycle of artificial revelation. They are quite literally just the physical tools we use to see the next horizon.
Wonderfully said.
And as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a puzzle to mull over on your own. We learned today that under our current system, innovators only capture a tiny 2.2% of the value they create, leaving the vast majority to society as a massive world-building bargain. But imagine a future, maybe not too far off, where a single, highly advanced AI lab discovers a completely automated, limitless energy source. And imagine they legally structure their patents and distribution contracts so tightly that they manage to capture 50% of the social surplus. Would that immense, unprecedented financial reward trigger a utopian explosion of new technologies as everyone races to replicate their success? Or would it completely paralyze the global economy by making the basic cost of survival too expensive for the rest of us?